This is the sleepy history of the samurai. Narrated by Jessica Gersel. Written by Alexandra Turney. We're all familiar with the idealized image of the samurai, the fearsome and fearless Japanese warriors of old. But what's the truth behind these people who have captivated imaginations for decades? Contrary to popular belief, they weren't just warriors, but an entire social class. Men, women, and children who dominated Japanese society for centuries. Tonight, we'll begin with their humble origins and follow them until their decline and disappearance in the 19th century. So just relax and let your mind drift as we explore the sleepy history of the samurai. In your mind's eye, try to picture a samurai. What do you see? Most likely, a Japanese warrior covered from head to toe in heavy armor. On his head, a distinctive, ornate helmet, and in his hand, a sword. We tend to imagine the samurai as noble, sword-wielding warriors, men who followed a strict code of conduct. In cultural depictions, like films or manga, they often seem like almost mythical figures. But the historical truth, as we'll soon discover, is even more interesting. In general terms, we can define the samurai as members of a warrior class. They were active in Japan mostly between the 12th and 19th centuries. However, exactly what we mean by samurai depends on the period we're talking about. And the samurai have gone by other names too, including bushi, a Japanese word meaning warrior. But to keep things simple, we'll stick to using the word samurai. Interestingly, this word translates as attendant, and it provides some insight into the origins of the samurai. These origins can be traced back to the Heian period, from the year 794 to 1185. During this time in Japan, there was no longer a system of conscription enforced by the government. So instead, private armies began to form. Warriors hired by nobles to protect their territory. The warriors became known as the samurai, or attendants. The men were essentially being hired as private soldiers or servants by the upper echelons of Japanese society. Their duties involved not just military conflict, but also guarding the property and arresting bandits, and even assisting nobles with their normal day-to-day duties. In a way, the early samurai were a bit like a mix between a butler, a bodyguard, and a police officer. And at the time, the word samurai referred more generally to a social class. It didn't just mean warrior. This is something we'll see again and again, the difficulty of defining the samurai. Their identity was complex, shifting over the centuries. For the imperial court and for the feudal lords, known as the daimyo, the samurai provided valuable protection. But over time, some of them also began to pose a threat. In the 10th century, for example, a samurai called Taira no Masakado led an uprising against the imperial court. The attempt ultimately failed, but Masakado was admired and even revered as a demigod after his death. His revolt was a sign of things to come. The samurai were becoming increasingly powerful, rebellious, and ambitious. During this period, the samurai began to use many of the weapons and armor we associate them with today. The saber-like sword, for instance, or the heavy box-like armor called oyoroi, which was generally worn by high-ranking samurai on horseback. The warrior identity of the samurai was developing into something more distinctive. Across Japan, people couldn't help but take notice. Then, in the 12th century, came a turning point in Japanese history. The imperial court was weak. After a period of civil war, a samurai called Minamoto no Yoritomo rose to power and became leader. He was a shogun, or military dictator, the first one in history. Prior to him coming to power, the term already existed, but it meant simply military commander. He essentially declared himself the military commander. Thanks to Yoritomo, the samurai now had supremacy. The new system, a government dominated by warriors and a land ruled over by feudal lords, would last for centuries. Now, it's worth noting that this new political system, the shogunate, didn't replace the emperor. But in practical terms, the shogunate was the governing entity from the late 12th century onward. Shoguns, such as Yoritomo, were the de facto rules of the country. So, to sum up, at this point in history, we have the emperor, who's technically the ruler of Japan. He still has an important symbolic and religious role, but the country is actually run by the shogunate, a military government. The leader of the government is the shogun, a military commander who is sometimes, but not necessarily, a member of the samurai class. What's important here, for our purposes, is to understand that the change in government led to a new era for the samurai. Indeed, the following centuries could be considered a kind of golden age in terms of samurai power and influence. At this point, when we're referring to the samurai, we're talking in quite general terms. So, let's take a moment to break down the definition. Samurai began to take on a different meaning from around the 12th century. Increasingly, it became associated with high social status and an elite warrior identity. But throughout history, that wasn't always the case. Also, while samurai warriors were generally male, some female members of the samurai class also had military training. They would fight, if necessary, to protect their land and families. Finally, we should keep in mind that the samurai were a social class which included men, women, and children. By the late 15th century, the samurai formed about 10% of the Japanese population, a minority, but a sizable one. Taking all of this into consideration, we can see that generalizing about the samurai is a little tricky. The name applies to so many different people over such a long period of time. So the samurai shouldn't really be considered a monolithic group. Let's keep that in mind as we continue our journey through history. During the Kamakura period, from 1192 to 1333, the samurai became more prominent in Japanese society. There are many reasons for this. In part, it was because of the shogun Yoritomo, who had established the high rank of the samurai. His rule also led to the beginning of feudalism in Japan, a system which benefited the samurai. Under feudalism, power was decentralized. As we've mentioned, at the top of the hierarchy was the shogun, the military commander. Beneath him were the daimyo, or lords, who controlled large regions of land. They needed military protection, which came, of course, from the samurai. The samurai were a bit like knights in medieval Europe, serving their lords and enjoying a higher social status as a result. Samurai warriors helped to maintain order across Japan, and during this period, they began to be involved in a larger-scale military conflict. In the late 13th century, the Mongols, led by the Emperor Kublai Khan, attempted to invade Japan. The samurai had to fend off tens of thousands of Mongol troops. These enemy troops were armed not just with bows and arrows, but also catapults and even explosives. For the samurai, who were used to one-on-one combat with swords, this kind of conflict must have proved challenging, to say the least. But fortunately for Japan, the weather was on their side. The ships of the invading Mongols were damaged by typhoons, and they were forced to retreat. Nonetheless, this battle left Japan feeling shaken, and it became even more evident just how important military strength was. There were clear incentives for maintaining the shogunate form of government and having well-trained samurai warriors. Around this time, there was an emphasis on training samurai from an early age. Children learned how to wield a sword and use a bow and arrow. And there were changes in samurai armor too. Warriors began to wear a more protective form of chest armor, known as haramaki. The domaru, or body wrap armor, also became more popular. Previously, this more lightweight, practical form of armor had mainly been worn by lower-ranking samurai. But now, even high-ranking warriors began to wear it. And soon, the iconic samurai helmet, known as the kabuto, traditionally worn by commanders, would become part of the armor of ordinary warriors. From this, we can see that the samurai were upping their game. After the Kamakura period came the Muromachi period and the start of a new shogunate governance. This era lasted from 1338 to 1573. Although there were no foreign wars during this time, the earlier Mongol invasions had left a scar, and the 15th and 16th centuries were a particularly turbulent time in Japanese history. Rebellions, uprisings, succession struggles, and civil war. This period is often referred to as the Sengoku, or Warring States period. The declining power of the central Ashikaga shogunate left a power vacuum that was filled by local lords, or daimyo, and the samurai loyal to them, who were constantly facing uprisings and power struggles between each other. Much of the modern media we see depicting feudal Japan as a sort of analogue for the Wild West shows this period, where fighting between samurai was near constant and allegiances were sometimes fleeting. During this time, there was an abundance of battlefields on which one could prove themselves. As a result, the samurai population grew, as lords would sometimes reward soldiers or other retainers for their loyalty, bravery, and prowess with lands of their own, a sword, and a stipend, giving them the de facto status of samurai. So, it's no wonder the samurai retained their prominent position. While they were sometimes involved in the chaos, they were also a means of ending conflict and restoring order. It was around this time that Buddhism became increasingly important in Japan. While the religion had been practiced for centuries, we can see why at this point people were particularly drawn towards it. In dark, uncertain times, religion offers hope and reassurance. The samurai were also influenced by Buddhism and Zen Buddhism in particular. Zen, with its emphasis on strict discipline, complemented the warrior lifestyle and helped to form their code of conduct. Zen Buddhism also helped samurai warriors to overcome their fear of death. If one accepts the fleeting, temporary nature of life, and that death may come at any moment, it's easier to face battle without fear. However, it's interesting to note that for some samurai, Buddhism had the opposite effect. Rather than encouraging them to be fearless warriors, it made them rethink their attitude to violence altogether. Some samurai put down their swords and became monks. As well as Zen Buddhism, Shinto, and Confucianism were important influences on the samurai. In particular, they led to the development of Bushido. This was the samurai moral code. We might compare it to chivalry, the code of conduct for knights in medieval Europe. Though, of course, it wasn't quite the same, as Bushido was influenced by Eastern religions and philosophies rather than Christianity. As Bushido is often misunderstood and misrepresented, let's take a moment to explore it in more detail. Bushido translates to the way of the warrior, and it refers to a code of conduct, how the samurai were expected to behave. Loyalty, sincerity, bravery, and honor until death. These were believed to be some of the most important values for the samurai. Indeed, there's a popular conception of the samurai warrior as being a person of integrity, a noble, loyal warrior with strict moral principles. And of course, for some warriors, this was probably the case. However, applying the concept of Bushido to all samurai is a little problematic. For a start, although moral principles and codes of conduct for samurai had been in existence for a while, Bushido as a concept was only formalized in the 17th century. The military strategist and philosopher Yamaga Soko wrote various texts about the samurai, which emphasized the moral qualities of a warrior. One of his pupils, a samurai himself, then wrote an influential text about samurai ethics. The title translates as The Code of the Samurai. This idea of the virtuous warrior was very popular and would influence perceptions of the samurai for years to come. There's a problem, however. By the time these texts were written in the 17th century, the samurai were much less active, at least in a military sense. Their role had become more symbolic. The true samurai warriors, the people who were actually fighting, lived a long time before the concept of Bushido was made official. So, it seems unlikely that all warriors were holding themselves to high moral standards. In fact, there's plenty of evidence that many samurai warriors were anything but noble. They were often motivated by money or focused on climbing the social ladder, advancing their own interests, in other words. And while samurai would generally kill out of necessity, they were also known to be cruel at times. For instance, take the practice known as tsujigiri, or crossroads killing. When a samurai got a new sword, he might test it out by attacking a random passerby. So much for the image of the noble warrior. It's also worth noting that sometimes the samurai idea of honor was far removed from what most of us would consider to be honorable behavior. Here's one example. Samurai warriors would often collect the heads of their enemies as trophies. And sometimes they would blacken the teeth of the heads in a ritual known as ohaguro. In Japanese culture at the time, blackened teeth on married aristocratic women, and less commonly on men, were considered beautiful. So, this strange ritual, a samurai proudly displaying the heads of his enemies, occasionally with blackened teeth, was considered an honorable act. It was proof of the warrior's skill and his loyalty to his warlord. The display was also a way for the samurai to prove the identities of the victims, showing his leader whom he had slain. If all went well, the warrior could expect to gain payment, prestige, and maybe even a promotion. Essentially, rewards for a job well done. This brings us to another samurai ritual, seppuku. To die with honor, rather than be captured by an enemy, some samurai warriors would end their own lives. Seppuku was the ritualistic act of suicide by sword, a cut to the belly. However, this was unlikely to cause a quick death. For that reason, an assistant usually stepped in to decapitate the warrior, ending their suffering. The extreme nature of seppuku has a morbid fascination. It creates the idea of the samurai warrior as an incredibly courageous, self-disciplined man. But while this was sometimes the case, not all samurai committed the act voluntarily. More commonly, in fact, seppuku was an act of capital punishment. Samurai who were guilty of serious crimes were ordered to commit seppuku. And if they were unwilling to cooperate, an executioner would do it for them. While we're on the subject of weapons, let's debunk another samurai myth: the importance of the sword. We tend to think of the sword as the samurai's weapon of choice. Imagine a samurai warrior, and you probably picture them wielding an impressive blade. While they might not have always been the go-to weapon for close combat, by the mid-1500s or the mid-Sengoku period, being given a sword by one's master was one of the qualifications for people born outside of the samurai class to be promoted to the status of samurai. Essentially, a soldier's master would give them a sword, some land, and a stipend, and they could then be considered samurai regardless of their birth caste. So, by the 17th century, the sword had become the standard weapon for the samurai, as well as a symbol of status and authority. But by this point in history, as we've already mentioned, samurai warriors were much less active. Their role in society had changed. Prior to the 17th century, many samurai used other weapons for combat. The bow and arrow, for example, were used for centuries. Warriors would also carry weapons that were used by ordinary infantry, such as spears or polearms. Samurai were expected to be skilled in archery and horsemanship, not just swordsmanship. However, the sword later became an important status symbol and a marker of the samurai class. In 1588, the ruler, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, himself a samurai, ordered a sword hunt. This involved confiscating weapons from farmers and commoners. From now on, only samurai would be allowed to have weapons such as swords. The aim of this so-called sword hunt was to establish authority and solidify boundaries between different social classes. Although the ruling did not last, it may have contributed to the growing association between samurai and their swords. And by the 17th century, only samurai were allowed to wear daisho. In other words, to carry two swords, one large and one small. These two swords indicated the samurai's rank. But the distinction seems to have been more symbolic than practical. And somewhat ironically, the samurai's association with the sword becomes stronger through history, just as their military activity was declining. On that note, let's return to our chronology of samurai history and see how things changed. As we mentioned earlier, the Muromachi period, the 14th to the 16th century, was an extremely tumultuous time in Japanese history. But it was also an era of samurai supremacy. Members of the samurai class dominated both government and society. Things began to shift in the Edo period, which started in the early 17th century. A new shogunate, or military dictatorship, was now in charge. And after so many years of internal conflict, the government's priority was maintaining peace and social order. Less fighting was good news for society, but not so good for the samurai, whose jobs and identities were inextricably linked with conflict. During the Edo period, there were about 400,000 samurai in Japan. They made up around 5 to 7% of the population. And while they retained their high status in society, in practical terms, there wasn't much for them to do. Samurai still needed to make a living. For the most part, they continued to be employed by their lords, the daimyo. Unfortunately, though, the daimyo were well less off than before. The government had introduced rules and restrictions that would limit the daimyo's resources to prevent them from becoming too powerful. This would hopefully reduce the risk of rebellion and civil war. So, the daimyo became poorer. And as they were the ones paying samurai salaries, the samurai also became poorer as a result. Some even had to borrow money from merchants. This must have been humiliating, considering that the merchants belonged to a lower social class than the samurai. During this time, some low-ranking samurai were unable to find work and ended up becoming impoverished. Generally, however, the samurai were able to adapt to a certain extent. They still belonged to one of the most privileged social classes and managed to find themselves new kinds of work. Some became government bureaucrats, while others became scholars or dedicated themselves to the arts. For instance, calligraphy, poetry, flower arranging, and the art of the tea ceremony. Towards the end of the Edo period, in the mid to late 19th century, there's evidence that class divisions were no longer quite so rigid. Some merchants had more money and political influence than samurai, even though they were technically below them. Also, farmers, or townsmen were sometimes promoted to the samurai class through adoption. An adult could be adopted by a samurai family, an arrangement that was mutually beneficial. Let's say the adopted adult was a second-born son in their birth family. In their new samurai family, they could now enjoy the privileged position of the firstborn son. This gave them more independence and a more important role in the family and the community. The samurai, meanwhile, gained a male heir, someone to ensure the continuity of the family line. Adoption helped the samurai to maintain their power in society. One way or another, it seemed like the samurai would survive. For centuries, they'd had such an important role in Japanese society. But ironically, in a way, the samurai brought about their own demise. In 1868, a revolution took place, the Meiji Restoration. The rebellion was led by some low-ranking samurai who were unhappy with the government. One of their aims was a return to imperial rule. After a coup d'etat in the imperial capital of Kyoto, the shogun was ousted and a new government was formed. Instead of the shogun, the emperor was now in control, or at least in theory. This was the beginning of a new era. It's where historians draw the line between traditional and modern Japan. The capital was moved from Kyoto to Edo. The city was then renamed Tokyo, or Eastern Capital. Another major change was the abolition of the feudal system, along with all its class privileges. And a few years later, a national army was formed, and conscription was introduced. The samurai were no longer the only armed force in Japan. So, what did this mean for the samurai as a class? As we've seen, even before the Meiji Restoration, many samurai were struggling with their changed role in society and their loss of income. With the new political system, things got even worse. Now, the samurai didn't even have the consolation of an elevated social status. Japanese society was changing rapidly as the country modernized, and it seemed that there was no longer room for the samurai. In fact, by this point in history, they technically no longer existed. Samurai now belonged to a new social class called Shizoku, which came with no privileges. From 1876, former samurai were no longer allowed to wear swords. And then, adding insult to injury, their government salaries were suspended. So, it's no wonder that some samurai, or rather, Shizoku, rebelled. But the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877 was crushed by the new Japanese army, who were equipped with superior modern rifles and cannons. For the samurai, this defeat was the final nail in the coffin. They had lost their name, their power and status, their weapons, and their purpose. The samurai merged into the rest of society and slipped out of view. However, their story doesn't quite end here. We could say that in a way, the samurai lived on through their families. Many people in Japan have samurai ancestors. And of course, the romanticized image of the samurai warrior has pervaded popular culture and propaganda. In the 1930s, for example, the Japanese military encouraged soldiers to be like samurai, to fight to the death. The samurai code of conduct, Bushido, was something that all soldiers could aspire to, regardless of their rank or background. By the Second World War, stories about the samurai filled the media. A poster from the early 40s shows a giant samurai warrior in full armor about to strike down enemy ships with his sword. Of course, not all people in Japan would have been convinced by these propaganda campaigns, and the soldiers who died in battle were not necessarily sacrificing themselves for samurai ideals. Nonetheless, the symbol of the samurai was a powerful one. And for some people, Bushido, that not so ancient code of conduct, continued to resonate. These days, Japan prides itself on being egalitarian. It's very different from the days of the samurai, when society was rigidly divided into different classes. So, to some extent, the samurai have lost their relevance. However, they still appear in media, such as films, TV series, and manga, Japanese comic books. And tourists are still drawn to cities like Kanazawa, which has several samurai museums and even a samurai district. Many of us continue to be captivated by their image and their history. And as we've seen, that history is so much more complex and interesting than any stereotype. The samurai were not all noble. Some were self-serving at best, or brutal at worst. Some samurai were wealthy, while others struggled to make ends meet. And as for the image of the warrior, yes, there were samurai with strong warrior identities, whose lives were defined by battle and conflict. But others were monks, or made a living as teachers or bureaucrats. And finally, something that's often overlooked, the samurai were men, women, and children too. And starting in the late 1500s, there were a number of samurai who weren't even Japanese. By unraveling the story of the samurai, we discover a very human history. One that's inseparable from the history of Japan.